The lights dimmed, but not for the final bow. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're listening from. Every comment brings us closer as a mystery family. I always enjoy reading them. If there's one thing that can make Nero Wolfe lower his book an extra inch and flick his eyes at me in mild disapproval, it's the sound of a woman's heels hammering our front steps at the wrong hour. It was 11:47 in the morning, which is not only wrong for social calls, but dangerously close to lunch, an interval Wolfe treats with the same reverence the Vatican reserves for midnight mass. I was at my desk in the office, sorting out a pile of bills and noting, with all the flair of a man condemned to housekeeping, that Theodore's invoice for miscellaneous orchid supplies could feed a small family for a month. Fritz was somewhere in the kitchen, orchestrating lunch with the precision of a neurosurgeon. Wolfe was in his chair, spine at a perfect obtuse angle, immersed in a fat volume on Venetian history. The knock didn't come. That's what made me look up. The doorbell didn't ring either. Instead, the sound of the heels stopped abruptly, followed by the unmistakable creak of our front door opening, which meant someone had decided that the line between public sidewalk and our sacred brownstone threshold was more of a suggestion than a rule. By the time I reached the hall, she was already halfway in, a tall brunette in a dark green coat, carrying a round hat box the size of a bass drum. Her hair was pinned in a way that looked expensive and like it had been assembled under emotional duress. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the office door as if she had rehearsed walking through it. "Lady," I said, "you just broke one of Mr. Wolfe's 10 commandments." She blinked, as if surfacing from somewhere far off. "Is he in?" Her voice had the quick, breathless tempo of someone who wasn't sure if they were here to beg, confess, or accuse. "He is, but so am I, and I'm the one who decides if you get to disturb him before lunch." I tilted my head at the hat box. "You planning to store that in our refrigerator?" She tightened her grip on the box. "It's safer if I keep it with me. May I please speak to him?" I have a personal policy about desperate women. They tend to lead to late nights and early mornings, and both cut into my happiness. But there was something about the way she held that box, fingers locked, shoulders rigid, that made me figure Wolfe might want to see this particular trespasser. I swung the office door open. "Incoming," I announced. Wolfe didn't look up right away, but the silence in the room shifted. When he finally lifted his gaze, it landed not on her face, but on the hat box. His eyes narrowed a fraction. "Goodwin," he said, "either you have taken up the millinery trade or our guest is here under some urgency." She stepped in, placed the box on the edge of Wolfe's desk, and unlatched the lid. Inside, resting on black velvet, was a thick crimson theater curtain, folded, but with one edge frayed and darkened by a jagged scorch mark. The smell of smoke drifted out like an accusation. "This," she said, "was supposed to fall after the applause. It fell before." Wolfe leaned back, interlaced his fingers across his middle, and regarded her without a flicker of change in expression. "And," she swallowed, "and someone made sure of it. I need you to find out who, before they make something else fall. On me, I didn't move to help her with the hat box. Not gallantry, self-preservation. You don't put your fingers on an exhibit before Wolfe decides if it's an exhibit." The woman stood with her hand on the lid as if the curtain might bolt for the door. Wolfe's eyes traveled up, finally, to meet hers. "Your name?" he said. "Evelyn Hart," she answered. "I manage productions at the Armitage Theatre on West 48th. "Manage," Wolfe repeated, as if tasting whether the word was edible. "You employ carpenters, electricians, a stage manager. You purchase properties and negotiate with unions and suppliers. You are not an artist." Her lips pulled in. "I'm not paid to be an artist. I'm paid to make sure artists are on their marks at 8 o'clock. "Pfui," Wolfe murmured, but so lightly it might have been a cough. "Sit," He didn't point at a chair. He didn't need to. She took the red leather facing him, the one that gives people a view of the beer cooler and a sense that they are auditioning for mercy. I circled to my desk and took out the notebook I use when the heir says we're employed even if the check hasn't signed the contract yet. "Tell us about last night," I said. "Or this morning. You've got smoke trailing your vowels." "It was last night," she said. "A preview performance for our new play, The Unharmed. The curtain is weighted and rigged to the fly system. It's not supposed to move without a call from the stage manager to the flyman. 30 minutes into Act 2, it dropped. No cue, no warning. It fell fast. The audience screamed. No one was hurt because the cast wasn't downstage. The leading lady, Sabrina Vale, was 3 steps upstage, and the curtain missed her. But it could have." She cut that short, ran a thumb along the hatbox rim, and resumed. "After we cleared the stage and got the house lights up, we raised it. This," she tapped the velvet, "was cut from the scorched edge. I brought it to you because the fire captain said the mark was from a hot tool. Not a cigarette, not an accident." "You have a fire captain in residence?" I asked. "We had one on speed dial. It's an old building. We rent it from the Armitage Foundation, which is mostly a board of donors with varying degrees of taste." Wolfe's lids lowered to a judicial slit. "Names," he said. She inhaled, held the film, and released. "All right, the board chair is Milton Dane. Real estate money, last year's tuxedo, and this year's opinion. The vice chair is Greer Lynn, who wants to turn the Armitage into a venue for immersive wellness performance, which, if you can define it, you deserve a grant. The executive director is Benjamin Keach. Friendly. Too friendly. The productions director is Rowan Ash. Brilliant, difficult, and not interested in clocks. The lead actress is Sabrina Vale. Famous, fearless, and not interested in limits that apply to other humans. The playwright is Noah Kerr, and the stage manager is Casey Rudd. The flyman is Big Lou Alvarez, who is neither big nor named Lou, but that's tradition. There are 15 other people whose names matter to me and won't to you yet." "They will," Wolfe said, "if we accept. Any casualties to the play's dignity besides the audience? We cancelled the rest of the preview and sent everyone home. The board called an emergency meeting for tonight. They want a scapegoat with documentation. And you," Wolfe said, "want the truth. I want to keep my theater open, but I don't want someone killed to do it." Wolfe's fingers traced a small board circle on the arm of his chair. "You entered my house without invitation. You imply distress. You present a problem whose resolution will irritate many and satisfy few. Why me?" "Because you don't leave your chair when you don't have to," she said, meeting his gaze clean. "Which means you decide things with your head. The Armitage is brittle right now. If someone starts throwing bodies out of jobs, it'll shatter. I need a mind that won't add weight just to hear a louder crash." I looked over at Wolfe. He didn't smile. The day he shows teeth without cutting someone is the day I retire to a monastery. But he let silence settle like a velvet drape. And I knew what that meant. He was interested. He had been from the moment the smell of smoke hit him. He hates theaters about as much as he hates public parks. But he respects systems. And he had just been told someone had spun a system out of its tracks. "The curtain," he said. "How did it fall?" "The harness pin was released," she said. "It's not a pin exactly. It's a locking cam. The flyman swears his hand wasn't near it. Something hot, like a heated oil, could have weakened the synthetic webbing near the cam, and the friction could have finished it. That's what the fire captain guessed. But you'd still need a hand at the rail to start it down." "2 conditions," Wolfe said. "A prior weakening and a trigger." "Yes." Wolfe shifted his bulk an inch, the metric for interest. "Motive?" She hesitated, and for the first time looked younger than her tailored coat. "If the show fails, Milton Dane gets to argue that the Armitage should pivot to rentals and events instead of producing new work. He's been itching to do that. If the show succeeds, Rowan Ash gets the credit and Sabrina Vale gets more famous. That annoys everyone who isn't Rowan or Sabrina. If Sabrina is hurt, Noah Kerr loses his leading lady and gains headlines. If Rowan loses control, he'll replace the stage manager. If Casey is blamed, the crew will riot. If the Armitage closes, Greer Lynn can usher in her wellness circus. If the building fails a safety inspection, the board can void contracts and stop paying out fees. Pick one. Pick several, I said. It's New York. We issue motives with the monthly Metro card. Her eye flicked to me. You're Archie Goodwin. It's been alleged. I read a profile of Mr. Wolfe once. It said your job is to keep him in orchids and beer by dragging the world to his door. I prefer the term concierge to catastrophe. Wolfe closed his book, always an omen. He placed it on the stand. Miss Hart? Mrs.? Miss. Miss Hart, I require coherence above all. I also require that my office not be treated as a public pier where the distressed tie up their boats. You will not enter again without ringing. You will return the remainder of the curtain to its proper custody and keep this sample here until I say otherwise. He touched the velvet with one finger and withdrew it. You will, for the balance of today, tell no one you have retained me, if you retain me. The fee is a retainer of $5,000, payable now, and expenses. Mr. Goodwin will attend your emergency meeting tonight. He will ask questions. He will do so with the full majesty of your authority. She didn't glance at the door or her watch. She reached into her handbag, extracted a slim checkbook, and wrote with the efficiency of a woman who had been writing checks in crises since high school. She tore the check, placed it on Wolfe's blotter, and put both palms on her knees as if to steady herself against movement that wasn't there. You have it, she said. And you have me. I'll call the board and tell them I'm bringing an outside consultant for safety and operations. Wolfe wagged a finger a fraction. Number safety and operations is a SOP to their vanities. Tell them nothing about me. Tell them Mr. Goodwin is a representative from our insurer. He is me. I didn't object. I don't mind wearing different hats as long as no one makes me wear the hat from the hat box. Archie, Wolfe said, record particulars. I went through the standard kit, addresses, phone numbers, roles, and who hates whom in the daylight. She gave them crisp and neat. The Armitage at 214 West 48th, board offices on Madison, Rowan Ash living in a loft in Tribeca with a plant that had survived more than one rehearsal by photosynthesizing despair. Sabrina on the Upper West with a piano and a balcony. Noah in a walk-up in Hell's Kitchen because suffering is tax-deductible for playwrights. Casey in Astoria with a roommate and a cat, and Big Lou in Washington Heights with an aunt who made empanadas that had kept the grid running through 3 blackouts. I wrote it all down. Fritz appeared at the door, catching the scent of the curtain sample like a sommelier sniffing cork. He didn't say a word, but his eyebrows accused us of scheduling calamity during lunch. Wolfe grunted that delicate grunt that means, serve and I'll pretend nothing exists but the plate. And Fritz left to do miracles with time and restraint. Before you go, Wolfe said to Evelyn, why did you not go to the police? Because nothing happened that the insurance can't cover. Not yet. And because if I say sabotage out loud to a cop, I'll have 24 hours to clear my desk. Who benefits from your desk clearing? Wolfe asked. Benjamin Keach. He's been gunning for my job since he started. He thinks the Armitage needs a softer hand. That's the word he uses. Soft. He's not soft. He's polished. And whom do you trust? Wolfe asked. She surprised me. Rowan. For all his ego, he wants the thing to be good. Sabrina, oddly enough. She's selfish, but not malicious. Casey, and Big Lou. She paused. And I used to trust Milton Dane to be a predictable enemy. Now he smiles too much. Wolfe nodded once. You will attend your meeting and say nothing you do not have to say. Mr. Goodwin will arrive early and speak with the stage manager, the flyman, and the director if he can corner him. He will examine the rail in the locking cam. He will ask for call sheets, cue sheets, and the nightly report. He will look at the fire captain's notes. He will learn who had access and when. He pointed at the hat box. Leave that. She stood, hesitated, then did something I hadn't expected. She put her hand, briefly, on the leather of Wolfe's desk. Not a plea, more of a pledge. Thank you, she said, and left the way she should have come, through me. When the front door shut, Wolfe breathed out through his nose. A theater, he said, as if the word had personally dented his shins. Gad. You're the one who took the curtain call, I told him. Not for the theater, he said, for the sabotage. It is an art more honest than most. Lunch. We ate Fritz's chicken with mushrooms that deserved its own union, and I checked the time against the promises I'd made without opening my mouth. After coffee, I made 2 calls. One to Lon Cohen at the Gazette to ask if any photographers had been bored on 48th Street last night and taken pictures of panic. Another to a contact who can pull a fire department incident report without making it a group activity. I also phoned a shop in Hell's Kitchen that sells stage rigging supplies and asked idle questions about locking cams and what kind of heat would scar synthetic webbing without leaving a drip pattern. Wolfe pretended not to listen. He listened. At 3, I went upstairs for my hat and a jacket that doesn't show stage dust, and checked my wallet for the credentials that say I represent people who like to keep premiums low. Wolfe called out before I hit the hall. Mr. Goodwin. Sir. The person who did this wished to force attention, to recalibrate a balance of fear, he said. No one takes such a risk without either desperation or practice. Note which you smell. Desperation smells like cheap cologne, I said. Practice smells like nothing at all. He grunted, which I took as approval, and I left the brownstone into a city that stages better than it lives. On the way to the Armitage, I turned the names over until they clicked into a rough circle. Milton with motives in dollars. Greer with motives in ideology. Keach with motives in office furniture. Rowan with motives in control. Sabrina with motives in attention. Noah with motives in drama. Casey with motives in survival. Big Lou with motives in not losing a paycheck. And Evelyn, whose motive, declared, was to keep the stage lights on. I didn't leave her out of the circle. You don't draw one and leave out the hand that brought you the compass. The Armitage is one of those theaters that looks younger at night, with its bulbs lit and its angles softened. In daylight, it's a middle-aged face without makeup. I pushed through the lobby doors and flashed the laminate that says, I belong anywhere I say inspection. A young woman at the box office read the word and went pale with the devotion of the underpaid. Casey Rudd? I asked. On stage, she said. They're resetting the rigging. The board meeting's at 6. Good, I said. I like a warm-up. And I walked down the aisle toward a stage where a curtain had fallen before the applause, and where, if I had any say, it wouldn't happen again without a cue from me. Casey Rudd was the kind of stage manager who looked like a metronome learned to walk. Short, trim, pencil behind one ear, a lanyard that could probably lower the moon if you clipped it to the right pulley. She met me at the lip of the stage with a glance that weighed me, priced me, and filed me. If you're fire, you're early, she said. If you're insurance, you're right on time. If you're press, turn around. Insurance, I said, and showed her a rectangle that made the word official enough to ruin a day. I need your nightly, cue sheets, line sets, and your fly rail like it's a nice day and I asked to see your garden. She didn't pretend to be happy. I'll print the run reports. The rail's upstage, right? Big Lou's up there now trying not to strangle anyone. Save the strangling for after 6, I told her. Board meeting. We have a board, she said, which is like having a committee of meteorologists, great at naming storms. She motioned me across the stage. Don't touch anything that moves without warning. I stepped through a forest of black legs and cables and took a squint at the grid. Above, a lattice of steel and ropes dreamed about gravity. The rails sat like a guarded secret, a row of locking cams and arbors with counterweights stacked neat, each line set tagged with masking tape in neat block letters. Main, border 1, elect 2, scrim, and there. Line 7, grand curtain. The locking cam for 7 wore a fresh white tape X that said, Casey doesn't trust this, and neither should you. Big Lou Alvarez, 5'7", forearms like braided cable, leaned on the rail with the posture of a man who'd learned patience 1 whole pound at a time. His hair was braided close to his skull, and his eyes had the steady that comes from lifting things you can't drop. "You're the insurer," he said, like a diagnosis. "I'm the gentleman who asks questions like a dentist drills, brief and unfriendly." I nodded at 7. "Tell me what didn't happen last night." "What didn't happen is me pulling that," he said. "My hand wasn't on it. My headset was. My eyes were on the cue light for Elect 2, and then I heard screaming. The curtain went. No cue. I locked my cams when I scratched my nose. I didn't scratch my nose. Anyone else on the rail? Not supposed to be, he said, which is not a denial if you've been around. His jaw made a notch. During a preview, you get civilians who think backstage is a safari. But no, the rail's tucked. Casey's got it sandbagged in gaff. There's only one way to reach it fast. You'd have to hug these weights. I'd notice. I crouched at the locking cam. The face of it was steel polished by hands and habit. The webbing that ran through the cam, new, bright synthetic, had a section about 2 inches down from the cam mouth that looked like it had survived a rough date with a match. The fibers on the edge had curled and fused a delicate, ugly fringe. I didn't put my finger on it. I used the back of a pen and didn't press. The smell was faint but not shy. Heat and something medicinal. Eucalyptus, I said. Big Lou frowned. Menthol. The guys use that rub, the one for sore backs. Smells like a cough drop that lost its way. Someone smart heats a metal pick, nicks the webbing, lets it cool, rubs menthol on the rail so the whole area smells like a locker room and not a tool. Then during the show, a bump or a nudge, and the weakened section shaves down. The cam does the rest. That's my fairground theory, I said. Lou's eyes flattened. You don't do this to a curtain. You could kill a person. Only if a person is standing wrong at the right time, I said, which is the trick. Casey came up with a sheaf of printouts and a clipboard that had survived wars. Nightly, she said. Notes in my handwriting. Cue sheets for Act 2, line set map. Also, here. She handed me a Ziploc with a clipped triangle of scorched webbing. We cut this after the house was cleared. Captain O'Halloran told us to preserve it. I wasn't going to give it to anyone with a hat and a badge without a receipt. You can sign my receipt and I'll sign yours. I signed her receipt. She signed mine. Access, I said. Who had it yesterday afternoon? Rail, grid, wings. Me, she said. Big Lou. My ASM. Tamsin Rowe. Rowan walked the deck with Sabrina at 4 to check sight lines for a new beat. Noah was out front scribbling. Benjamin Keach did his executive walkthrough. The board wasn't on deck. The donors don't do splinters. The electricians were up for a focus correction from 3 to 320. Elect 2. That's why Lou was watching it. Props checked the table. Carpentry checked the traveler track. No one had a reason to touch the grand. Stage door log? At the call board. She hooked a thumb. Sign-ins. I keep them honest. The call board flapped with schedules, a typed, do not touch rail without permission, and a sharpied list of tonight's sins. The sign-in sheet had a neat column of names and times. Crew signed in starting 2, cast at 5. I ran my finger down and didn't like what was missing. Your ASM didn't sign yesterday, I said. Casey's head snapped. Tamsin. She was here. Then, she was late. She texted me at 4:05. Said subway claptrap. I wrote her in. She pointed at a scrawl that looked like her own handwriting. It was. Good habit, bad habit, I said. Depends who reads it. It's a preview, she said, and she didn't color, but her voice thinned. You triage. Any visitors backstage who aren't on either list? I asked. Casey hesitated. Greer line. She brought a wellness advisor. An exorcist, I said. Breathing specialist, she said. I sent them out. Rowan exploded when he saw them in the wing. They were here 5 minutes. What time? Between 4:30 and 5. What about Milton Dane? I asked, because it's rude not to include the donor when you're laying out the suspects. In his box, Casey said. He doesn't do backstage. He thinks crews are a contamination you sanitize budgets against. I took the nightly and scanned the paragraph where last night got bent. Here, you note at 2:20 p.m. Grand curtain webbing inspected, no visible wear. Who inspected? Lou, Casey said. Me, Lou said from behind us. We check before every show. You can lose a show to a stuck traveler. I ran my fingers along the webbing in the cam. Smooth. No heat, no burr. So the weakening happened after 2:20, or you missed it? I looked at him. He didn't flinch. I don't miss it. Then after 2:20, I said. Who had a heat source? Casey ticked on fingers. Electrics, obviously. Props, glue guns, but not on deck at the rail. Carpentry, soldering pencils sometimes, but not yesterday. The only hot thing near the rail after 2:20 should have been the light from Elect 2 while focus was happening, and that's 20 feet above. What about Rowan? I asked. Temper counts as heat. Casey didn't smile. He throws words, not tools. Where is he now? In his office, punching the air and calling it rehearsal, she said. Second level, house right. I want 5 minutes, I said. Take 3, she replied. Rowan Ash had the lungs of a prophet and the haircut of a man who believed hair obeyed genius. His office was a short corridor from the catwalk, studded with posters of shows that had gone from train wreck to miracle, with a miracle that looked a lot like an extra week of previews. He was pacing when I filled his doorway, and he didn't like his doorway filled. Closed, he said. Open, I answered, and stepped in. I'm from the insurer. You insure dreams? He gave me a look that could have welded steel. Ask your questions and make them kind. Were you on the rail yesterday? I was everywhere yesterday, he said, because that's what directing is. I did not touch the rail. I breathed on the actors. I breathed on the play. I breathed on a cup of coffee at 3:12 that was too cold. Did you see Greer Lynn backstage with a guest? He stopped pacing. I saw Greer pretending to soothe a star as if Sabrina Vale is soothed by strangers holding their fingers near her nose. I asked them to leave. They left. I then told Benjamin Keach to keep the board out of my wings. He thanked me. He loves thanking me. It's like lint he collects. Sabrina? I asked. Where was she during the focus work? In the house with Noah, sniping at each other in couplets, he said. They are unprofessional and effective. I tolerate both until the curtain, which fell, by the way, before it was told to. So I heard, I said. Do you want the show to fail? He looked at me as if I had suggested he take up dentistry for elephants. I am a despot, Mr. Insurance, not a saboteur. I want to control when it fails or triumphs. I need failure to be my instrument. Someone else took my instrument and smashed it on a downbeat. Find them. Why would someone want your instrument smashed? I asked. He smiled for the first time. Because a broken instrument says, change the conductor. I left him to his air and found the props room, because experience says sabotage and props have at least waved to each other before. The room smelled like a thrift store with a degree. I looked through a bin of tools with a finger's eye, no touching unless I had to. On a lower shelf, a soldering pencil lay coiled like a resting snake. I sniffed near the tip, not close, caught the bite of flux, and, faint under it, the chalk of menthol. I didn't bag it. I noted it and told Casey on the way out. "We share tools," she said. "Props, carp, electrics, whoever needs. The pencil could have been used to fix a brass prop hinge. We're not a crime lab, Mr. Insurance. We make make-believe." "You also make enemies," I said. "Keep that pencil where it is and don't let anyone tidy. Where's Sabrina?" "In her dressing room," Casey said. "Which is Siberia with a nicer mirror." Sabrina Vale had a voice that made you want to buy a ticket to hear it say no. She was in a robe, hair wrapped, feet up, scrolling through a phone with the solemnity of a judge. When I introduced myself, she took me in from shoes to hairline. "Did you come to tell me I almost died?" she asked. "Because the papers did that already." "I came to ask if you think someone wanted you to," I said. She considered. "I think someone wanted someone to look like an amateur. That is a thicker grudge than murder and more common in this industry." "Who holds it?" "All of us," she said pleasantly. "But Milton holds it like a pension. Greer holds it like a wellness wand. Benjamin holds it like a pen hovering over my contract. Rowan holds it like air. Noah holds it like a thorn he presses for inspiration. Casey holds it because she has to carry it to keep the lights on. Evelyn—" She paused, and something softer moved behind her eyes. "Evelyn holds the building up. If you accuse her, you'll need 10 people to replace her spine." "Were you near the rail yesterday between 4 and 5? She laughed, a clean sound. "I was murdering a monologue in row G and asking Noah if the line, 'We are unharmed until we are not,' was written by a man who has ever known harm. The rail and I have a mutual restraining order." "What about Benjamin Keach?" Her smile thinned. "Benjamin walks places. He likes to see how things are made so he can explain it to donors as if he made it. He knows just enough to be dangerous. Not with tools. He's afraid of dust. With policy, I thanked her and left before the robe became a topic that complicated my life. Back at the rail, I watched Lou run a safety. He moved with the careful grace of men who make gravity do tricks. I asked him a last thing. "When did you leave the rail yesterday? Bathroom, smoke, water?" 3:40, he said. 4 minutes. I told Tamsin to sit and look, not touch. She knows the rule. "Tamsin doesn't sign in, shows up late, sits at the rail for 4 minutes, I said. "That's enough to heat a pick and make an introduction to a webbing." Lou's shoulders went up a notch. "She didn't do this," he said. "She wants a career, not a funeral." "I want facts," I said, and took a picture of line 7's cam with my eyes, because the phone stays pocketed until Wolfe blesses it. I found a quiet corner in the house and called the brownstone. Fritz answered with the benevolent frost he saves for men who interrupt simmering. He handed it off, and Wolfe came on with a noise that means he's on the line but unimpressed with the world's existence. "Well." "2-step, sabotage confirmed," I said. "Heat, nick on the webbing, menthol rub to mask it, trigger likely a bump during focus or a hand with nerve. Access after inspection, electrics up high, Greer Lynn plus a breathing guru backstage, Benjamin Keach prowling, Rowan everywhere, Sabrina and Noah out front, ASM Tamsin parked at the rail for 4. Props room has a soldering pencil that smells like Sunday school for lungs. Stage door log was doctored. Casey added Tamsin late. Honest error. Big Lou is clean unless he learned to split himself. Motives fat and gleaming, meeting at 6. "Menthol," Wolfe said, tasting the word as if deciding whether to ban it. "Calculated, not crude. Our saboteur disdains fingerprints." "And likes cover," I said. "Greer brings a wellness guest you can tuck a tool into. Benjamin has executive pretext. Tamsin has opportunity and none of the armor. Mr. Keach," Wolfe said, "has the most to gain with the least moral cost. By his measure. Miss Lynn has ideology," which is as corrosive as greed. The assistant has fear. Mr. Dane has money and a box seat. He will hire others to soil their hands. Mr. Ashe is an artist. He rarely risks his tool. "What do you want at the meeting?" I asked. "A show," he said. "You will, as the insurer, insist on a demonstration of safety procedures on the rail. Require that each person who had access describe their actions in sequence. People who lie cannot synchronize. Observe who clings to generalities. Ask Mr. Keach to produce a facilities access log. He will either have it too quickly, which means he has rehearsed, or too slowly, which means he fears what it shows. And if he refuses? Then you will ask Miss Hart, in front of the board, whether her insurer should suspend coverage pending clarity," Wolfe said. "He will not refuse. I'll also keep the soldering pencil where it is and ask who used it last." "No," Wolfe said, and the word was a lid clicking shut. "You will ask nothing of that. If the pencil is the instrument, our saboteur will return to tidy it. Miss Rudd will set a trivial task that requires the props room to be empty for 5 minutes prior to the meeting. Saul Panzer will watch who enters, when, and with what expression." "You called Saul," I said. It wasn't a question. "I'm not a fool," he said. "Theater is camouflage. I require someone who sees under grease paint. Go, do not improvise more than necessary, and keep your spine uncrushed." "Copy," I said, and hung up with a click that made the theater's hush feel manufactured. The house crew began to drift toward the green room for a pre-meeting caffeine fight. I took one last look at Line 7's locking cam, at the neat X of tape and the ugly fringe that had made 1,000 hearts lurch, and I decided the man or woman who had given the rail that kiss of heat liked control too much to stop at one rehearsal. If Wolfe was right, and the best. Odds in town say he is. The next cue was coming, and this time we'd be ready to call it. I stayed put in the house long enough to watch the crew vanish in knots of 2 and 3, the easy rhythm of people who've worked together long enough to fight and still pass the tape. The stage was quiet, the kind of quiet you get before an orchestra tunes up. Expectant, but with no idea yet what's coming. I walked a slow circuit up the left aisle, down the right, giving the place a once-over that would look casual to anyone who didn't know what I was counting. Exit doors, shadows where a body could wait, angles from which you could get to the rail unseen. Every theater has its rat runs, and this one was no different. The trick would be knowing which one had been used yesterday and by whom. When I cut back toward the stage door, Casey was there, frowning at a clipboard as if it owed her rent. She didn't look up until I was 3 feet away. "Saul Panzer's coming in," I said. "You'll give him your full cooperation. He's my technical consultant." She gave me a side eye. "If you say so. Is he here to watch the meeting?" "He's here to watch who tries to erase a footprint," I said. "I need you to make the props room empty for 5 minutes before 6. "That's not hard," she said. "Props crew's union call ends at 5:30. I can send my ASM for coffee at 5:55. "Send her somewhere farther than coffee," I said. Casey's jaw moved a fraction. "You think Tamsin? I don't think anything yet," I cut in. "But she's had opportunities. This way, if she's clean, she stays clean. If she's not, we'll have eyes on her." She gave me a nod that was half reluctant, half impressed. Done. At 5:30 sharp, Saul slipped in through the stage door, looking like a man with no reason to be noticed. I caught his eye, gave him the brief in a whisper. Props room, soldering pencil, 5-minute window, and he vanished toward the Warren backstage like he'd been working here for years. If there's a better man in New York for seeing things without being seen, I haven't met him. I had half an hour to burn before the board meeting, which gave me time to find Benjamin Keach. I tracked him down in the lobby, standing under a framed photograph of the Armitage in its 1920s heyday, all guilt and promise. Keach had the kind of face that looks trustworthy in a brochure, handsome enough to seem capable, bland enough to seem safe. He was talking to a man in a camel coat who radiated donor money. When I stepped into his line of sight, he excused himself and came over with a smile that could have been printed on quality paper. "You must be Miss Hart's insurance rep," he said, extending a hand. "I must be," I said, shaking it. "I hear you've got an interest in safety and operations." "Of course, we all do," he said, teeth still politely displayed. This was a terrible mishap. Thank goodness no one was injured. "Terrible mishaps are my bread and butter," I said. "I'll need the facilities access log for yesterday afternoon. Key cards, passcodes, sign-ins for all restricted areas." That smile faltered just enough to make it interesting. "Is that really necessary? The staff are vetted." "Necessary if you want the insurer to sign off on coverage for the rest of your run," I said. "Otherwise, we might have to suspend." He weighed me for a beat and then nodded. "I can get that for you. It might take a while to collate." "Do it before the meeting," I said. "And bring 2 copies." He started to say something and thought better of it. "Fine, I'll see what I can do." Then he was gone toward the offices, moving faster than a man who'd only been inconvenienced. By 5:50, the crew had been corralled. The board was arriving in 2s and 3s, and the house took on that mixed smell of coffee and perfume that says money is in the room. Evelyn Hart was posted near the aisle like a general at her post, greeting the board with the right blend of deference and steel. When she saw me, she didn't smile, just gave the smallest tilt of her chin toward the stage. Everything set. From the corner of my eye, I caught Tamsin Rowe heading toward the lobby with a to-go carrier. No coffee shop in the neighborhood was going to get her back here in 5 minutes, which meant Saul had his window. I took a seat in the 3rd row, end of the aisle, where I could see both the stage and the door to backstage. The meeting began the way board meetings do, everyone speaking as if the sound of their voice was the missing ingredient to fixing the world. Milton Dane took the center like he owned it, which, in a way, he did. Greer Lynn sat 2 seats away, radiating the serene conviction of a woman who'd never once doubted her own ideas. Benjamin Keach came in a minute late, carrying a thin folder I guessed was my access log. He didn't hand it to me. That was fine. I wasn't in a rush. The point wasn't to read it. It was to see how quickly he'd pulled it together and whether his hands shook when he did. Evelyn called the meeting to order and introduced me as a representative from our insurer, here to assist with ensuring last night's incident does not recur. A few heads turned my way with the same expression people reserve for fire alarms during weddings. I stood. Part of my job is making sure your venue's safety procedures are not just adequate, but actively preventing repeat incidents. We'll be conducting a short demonstration at the rail. Everyone who had access to that area yesterday between 2 p.m. and curtain will walk me through their actions in sequence. That got me a ripple. Milton sat back, clearly entertained. Greer's brows drew together a fraction. Keach glanced at Evelyn, who didn't look away from me. We moved to the stage in a slow herd, board members and staff mingling like oil and water. At the rail, I pointed at line 7. "This is where the failure occurred. Casey Rudd will begin." She did, crisp and clear, noting her inspection time and what she saw or didn't see. Lou followed, his voice steady. Rowan was next, and though he swore he'd never touched the cam, his hands moved in small conductor sweeps as he spoke, like he was rehearsing a different show in his head. Sabrina came after him with a dismissive wave. "I wasn't within 50 feet, darling. I leave pulleys to those who understand them." Greer recounted her 5 minutes backstage, downplaying the breathing specialist to the point of invisibility. Keach took his turn last, describing a brief walkthrough that somehow took him through every wing but, he claimed, not to the rail itself. Through it all, I watched the details, not the words, who gestured toward the cam, who avoided it, who looked at Lou as if for approval, who kept their hands jammed in pockets. Tamsin wasn't present, Her absence was expected. Halfway through Keach's explanation, Saul appeared in the wing, eyes meeting mine for a second before he drifted away again. The signal was subtle. He had something. When the sequence ended, I made a show of thanking everyone and turned to Keach. Now, about that access log. He hesitated half a beat too long, then handed over the folder. The printout was fresh, still warm. The timestamps were neat, maybe too neat. "Everything's there," he said. "I'm sure it is," I said, sliding it under my arm without looking. "We'll review it in detail later." The meeting broke up with the usual back-slapping and sotto voce strategizing. Evelyn intercepted me near the stage door. "Well?" she asked. "I'll know more after I talk to Wolfe," I said. "But Saul found something. Don't let anyone near that props room until I call you." She nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her face before the mask went back on. "I'll lock it myself." Outside, the evening air had the faint bite of early spring. Saul was waiting by a lamp-post, hands in his coat pockets, looking like a man on a smoke break without the smoke. "Tell me," I said. 5:58, Keach slipped into the props room, Saul said. In a hurry, but not careless. Went straight to the workbench, picked up the soldering pencil. Looked at the tip, sniffed it, then unscrewed it and swapped the tip for one from a drawer. Wiped the old tip on a rag. Pocketed it, put the pencil back. Out in under a minute. And he checked the hallway before he went in, but not after. Confident going in, nervous coming out. "That's our man?" I asked. Saul shrugged. Could be tidying up for someone else. But he knew exactly what to touch. I thanked him and walked a block before calling Wolfe. He answered on the second ring, sounding like I'd interrupted him in the middle of explaining something profound to a beer bottle. "Well," Keach went into the props room during the meeting, swapped the tip on the soldering pencil, pocketed the old one. Saul saw the whole thing. He didn't even try to hide the fact he knew what he was looking for. "Fatuous," Wolfe said. "He removes the most direct evidence in front of others. Either he thinks himself immune, or he acts for another and cannot resist tidying." "Which way are you leaning?" "Toward immunity," Wolfe said. "Mr. Keach will have an alibi or a shield, perhaps in the form of delegated authority. We must pierce it." "What's next?" "You will bring the old tip to me," Wolfe said. "Mr. Panzer will follow Mr. Keach when he departs. We will see whose door he darkens." "And Evelyn?" "Tell her nothing conclusive," Wolfe said. "She must continue to behave as if she trusts him. Let him feel secure. It will hasten his carelessness." I clicked off and found Saul again. He handed me the old tip wrapped in the kind of paper that once held sandwiches, which was as good a chain of custody as we were going to get tonight. I headed back toward the brownstone with it in my pocket, the theater's smell of menthol and scorched fiber still in my nose. The curtain had fallen early once. If Wolfe was right, the real show was just getting ready for its opening night, and the next cue was going to drop hard. By the time I got back to the brownstone, it was late enough for most of the city to have switched from business faces to night faces. Wolfe hadn't moved from his chair, but there was a faint crease in the rug near his right foot that meant he'd been thinking with more energy than usual. He didn't look up when I came in, just extended a hand, palm up. I placed the soldering tip in it, still wrapped in Saul's sandwich paper. He unwrapped it, holding the edge of the paper instead of the object itself, and tilted it under the lamp on his desk. The tip had a slight blackened curve, with a narrow strip near the end that was a shade lighter, almost clean. Wolfe made a small sound in his throat. "A disciplined user," he said. "Cleaned before each heating to avoid residue. A man who wishes his work to be invisible." Keach knew exactly where it was, I said, dropping into my chair. Didn't even hesitate. Straight to the workbench, swapped it for a new tip, pocketed the old one. "And he did so during the meeting when his absence would be least remarked," Wolfe said. That implies premeditation. He knew the opportunity would occur, and he was confident enough to believe no one would follow him. "Saul's following him now," I said. "If Keach leads him to a co-conspirator, we'll have more to work with." Wolfe rested the tip on his blotter, as far from his orchids as possible, and steepled his fingers. "The difficulty is not proving that Mr. Keach tampered with a soldering instrument. It is establishing that he used it to weaken the webbing at the rail, and that he had motive enough to risk the collapse of a production." "Motive we can guess," I said. "Hart's job, control of the theatre, board politics. He gets her out. He becomes the friendly face of stability." "Guessing is insufficient," Wolfe said. "We must have him admit to a chain of events, or we must contrive one that forces him to contradict himself." "Contriving sounds more fun," I said. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if I'd offered him boiled cabbage for breakfast. "There will be a rehearsal tomorrow?" "Afternoon," I said. "Casey mentioned they'd reset cues and run Act 2 to keep the cast from losing their rhythm." "Good. You will attend. You will speak to Miss Hart beforehand, and request that she, under the guise of appeasing the insurer, require Mr. Keach to be present at the rail during the inspection of safety measures. Insist that he explain them to you as if you were ignorant. Ask him to demonstrate how the locking cam holds the webbing and, this is crucial, how it might fail if improperly maintained. His vanity will compel him to display knowledge. He will betray familiarity with the very damage he claims not to have seen. And if he's too smart for that, then you will deliberately misstate the function of the cam, prompting him to correct you. He will not resist." The phone rang. Wolfe nodded at me, and I picked it up. Saul's voice came through, calm as always. "Keach went straight to a wine bar on 8th, met a woman, early 40s, black coat, satchel. Talked for 15 minutes. She passed him a manila envelope under the table. He left first. She stayed. Ordered food." "Got a photo?" I asked. "I got a memory," Saul said. "She's crew. I've seen her at the Armitage before. Electrics, I think. Name's Belle Howard. Worked load-in last fall. Not on this show's call sheet." "Thanks," I said, and hung up. I filled Wolfe in. "An accomplice," he said. "Or a courier. The envelope." "If it's money, it's sloppy," I said. "If it's paperwork, it may be leverage," Wolfe finished. "Miss Howard's absence from the crew suggests she is unbound by current loyalty. She may have been paid to do the initial damage, leaving Mr. Keach to manage the aftermath." "Which puts us back at motive," I said. "Not entirely," Wolfe said. "If she can be persuaded to speak, she may confirm who engaged her and why." "Saul could lean on her," I suggested. "Mr. Panzer will watch her," Wolfe said. "If she is careless with the envelope, he will have it. If not, we shall contrive another inducement." The next morning was as grey as a theatre seat before the lights go down. I got to the Armitage an hour before the rehearsal, which gave me time to catch Evelyn in her office. She listened while I laid out Wolfe's plan, her expression unreadable. "If Keach smells a setup," she began. "He won't," I said. "You're the one making the request, and it's under the banner of insurance compliance. He'll think it's a hoop you're being forced to jump through." She tapped a pen against her desk. "I can make him do it, but if you're wrong, Archie, I'm going to have a very angry board member and a show that still smells of smoke." "If I'm wrong, Wolfe will eat breakfast standing," I said. And that never happens. At 2:00, the crew was on deck, cast in the wings, Casey at her post. I saw Keach arrive, looking mildly annoyed, which was promising. Evelyn explained the insurance requirement, and Keach produced a thin smile. "Of course," he said. "Happy to educate." We went to the rail. Lou stood back, arms folded, watching like a man measuring the weight of every word. Keach took hold of Line 7's cam with a familiarity that made Casey's jaw tighten. "This," he said, "is the locking cam. It holds the webbing under tension. In normal use, The webbing remains intact for years. If it is cut or burned here—" He pointed precisely at the damaged spot from the night of the incident. "The load can fail without warning." "That's interesting," I said. "I thought damage would have to be closer to the arbor to cause that kind of failure." He shook his head. No, the fibers here are under constant friction against the cam housing. Any weakness is magnified." I let a beat pass. "So a small burn could do it?" "Certainly," he said, then seemed to remember himself. "In theory. Of course, our inspections would have caught it," I finished, "unless it was done between inspection and curtain." His mouth tightened just enough to see. "Hypothetically." Lou's eyes flicked to mine. I knew he'd heard it too, the way Keach had claimed expertise in the exact mechanics of the damage while supposedly never having examined it closely. The rehearsal ran. I drifted in and out of wings, talking to crew, making notes that would look good in an insurer's file but meant nothing to me. My attention was on Keach, how he watched the rail more than the stage, how he avoided passing the props room. Twice he glanced toward the door, then away. After the run, Saul called. Belle Howard just met another man outside the theater. Older, grey hair, well-dressed. She passed him the envelope. "Get a tale?" I asked. "Already on him," Saul said. "Name's Milton Dane." That fit too neatly. Dane with the money, Keach with the access, Howard with the hands to do the job. I called Wolfe from the lobby and laid it out. "Mr. Dane will deny it," Wolfe said. "He will claim the envelope contained legitimate documents. We must present him with a configuration of facts in which denial is impossible without implicating himself in another falsehood." "Which means?" "Bring them all to my office," Wolfe said. "Miss Hart will arrange it. The pretext is that the insurer requires a final statement from all parties before issuing a report. Once here, I will arrange the pieces." It was bold, but Wolfe does bold in an armchair better than most people do with a marching band. I found Evelyn in the hall and told her. She hesitated, then nodded. "They'll come if I tell them the insurer demands it. I can get them all there tonight." "Do it," I said, "and tell them not to be late. Wolfe hates waiting almost as much as he hates being wrong." By the time I left the Armitage, the air felt sharper, like the city had shifted a gear. We had the players, the motive in outline, the method in hand. Wolfe would do the rest, and when that curtain fell in his office tonight, there wouldn't be any applause. Just the quiet sound of someone's last alibi hitting the floor. By 7:30, the brownstone was taking on that tone it gets when we're about to host a pageant. Quiet as a library, but with a current in the air you could string lights on. Fritz had done his part. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon and roast, which puts most people in the mood to mistake appetite for safety. Wolfe was in his chair, a little straighter than usual, which is his version of pacing. I'd made the calls with Evelyn's help and kept the pretext clean. The insurer required contemporaneous statements from all principals before certifying coverage. No mention of sabotage. No mention of solder. They rang in stages. Evelyn first. She'd earned the right to arrive without a drum roll. Casey and Big Lou together, because crews travel in pairs when the air's funny. Greer Lynn and her serenity pressed into a dress that announced generosity as a lifestyle. Rowan Ash with a scarf, because a director without a scarf is like a bishop without a mitre. Sabrina Vale, last of the artists, late by 4 minutes, right on time for a star. Benjamin Keach came at the quarter hour, with a brief smile and a briefcase. Milton Dane showed at the half, the way money does, expecting the world to have kept itself warm for him. I placed them the way Wolfe likes, the red leather for the person who believes he's steering, the yellow for the one who wishes she were, the green for the one who thinks he can take a nap and win. That put Keach in red, Greer in yellow, Dane in green. The rest along the perimeter, with Evelyn angled where she could see them all and know she wasn't alone. Casey near the bookcase, Lou standing until I made him sit, Rowan taking a corner like a sulking general. Sabrina draped as if I'd staged it. Wolfe accepted them with a nod and nothing else. He let the room feel itself, which is half his show. When the silence was warm enough to leave fingerprints, he spoke. "This is an administrative chore," he said, as if apologizing for civilization. "You will each, in turn, answer Mr. Goodwin's questions regarding yesterday's performance and preparations. He will summarize. You will sign, if your insurer," he didn't say ours, "is satisfied. We will not be compelled to advise a halt in operations." That got everyone's attention. You can put a lot of adjectives on a board member, but halt is the only one that raises their pulse faster than audit. I started with Casey, timelines, inspections, who walked where when. She was clean, crisp, and unembellished. She signed with a quick hand. Big Lou followed, steady as concrete. He signed as if he were clocking out. Rowan gave me his version with the boredom of a man who finds facts insufficiently dramatic. He couldn't resist editorializing about sabotage as an act of cowardice, which was good for the transcript and better for the room. Sabrina contributed without performing, another kind of performance, and made sure we knew she respected crews and feared amateurs. She signed with a flourish that made the pen feel important. Greer recounted her wellness tourism, with the tact of a diplomat apologizing for a cousin. She insisted the guest never approached the rail. She signed with a pen produced from a purse that could have stored a violin. When I asked for the name of the breathing specialist, she gave me Raphael with an F, and an airy shrug about surnames. I wrote F, probably imaginary, on the margin of my pad where only Wolfe could eventually see it. Then Keach. I kept my face pleasant and my questions wooden, the way people do when they want you to relax. He walked through his brief walkthrough, and I asked for specifics he didn't want to have, then asked about the rail. He repeated his earlier lecture from rehearsal, how a small burn at the cam could precipitate failure, softened with a hypothetically, which I let sit like a button someone would push later. He signed, left-handed curl, not nervous. Dane last. He offered nothing he didn't have to, and less than that where he could. He had not, he said, gone backstage. He had not spoken to staff. He had not, as a principle of governance, interfered. I asked for his signature. He obliged with a bold, blunt hand that wanted to be a stamp. If it had been only about transcripts and ink, the evening could have ended with coffee. It wasn't. Wolfe let my pen rest, then raised his lids a degree. "The incident at your theatre last evening," he said, "was engineered. I am indifferent to the legal label if you are squeamish. It was not an accident. A synthetic strap in a locking cam was deliberately heat-weakened and concealed with menthol to confuse casual inspection. During performance, a nudge sufficed." Rowan made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a curse. Greer's serenity developed a seam. Keach looked toward Dane because his eyes couldn't help it, then back to Wolfe in time to pretend he hadn't. Wolfe's gaze slid to Keach. "Mr. Keach, you had both access and appetite. A man of your temperament enjoys what he calls stewardship. You would not allow chaos unless it served your idea of order. This did." Keach tried mild. "Mr. Wolfe, I appreciate your talent for narrative, but pfui." Wolfe didn't raise his voice. He never needs to. "You recognize the exact point of failure on a device you professed not to examine. You disappeared during a meeting convened to address safety to exchange a soldering tip for a fresh one, and you pocketed the old, a noisy tidying that will trouble you." Keach's chin tipped. If I handled a tool, it was to ascertain if it had been misused. "Of course," Wolfe said blandly. "You handled it after it had been misused, to ensure no one could ascertain how. Your confidence is interesting. It suggests insulation." Dane sat forward, allowing his annoyance to register like a man granting a favor. "Mr. Wolfe, I'm not sure what game you're playing. If you intend to allege—" "I intend to arrange," Wolfe said. "Allegation is a poor substitute when arrangement will do." He turned his head a degree. "Mr. Goodwin?" That was my cue. I went to my desk, opened the drawer, and took out the soldering tip wrapped in Saul's paper. I did not offer it to Keach. I put it on Wolfe's blotter within his polite reach. Wolfe did not touch it. "This," he said to the room, "is the tip Mr. Keach removed from the Armitage props room this evening at 5:58. He thought no one saw. Someone did." Keach's smile reappeared, thinner. "Chain of custody on a piece of scrap metal will not impress a judge." "I do not need to impress a judge," Wolfe said. "I need to impress the truth upon Miss Hart and her board. Courts will come later if they must. For now, the fact is that you interfered with possible evidence. That is not the act of an administrator. It is the act of a man with sweat on his conscience." Greer's voice came soft. "Benjamin?" He didn't look at her. He was doing math in his eyes, outcomes and counter-moves. He settled on disdain. "I am not obliged to defend myself against innuendo." "Then don't," I said. "Defend yourself against an envelope." That made him glance again, this time at Dane. And it wasn't a big glance, but in a room like ours, you could hear it land. Dane's jaw tightened. Wolfe arranged his mouth into something like pity. "Mr. Dane, this afternoon you received from Miss Belle Howard a manila envelope. She is an electrician by trade, not currently on Miss Hart's payroll. 2 days ago she made an unpaid visit to the Armitage under the pretext of delivering a tool she had borrowed." He shifted a finger toward the wrapped tip. "She did not borrow this. She merely used something like it. Today she was your courier." Rowan sat up. "Belle? Belle was on my Othello in 2021. She knows rigs, not politics." "Precisely," Wolfe said. "People who know rigs can be paid to touch the right thing for the wrong reason. She was likely engaged for a brief, ugly errand. She may not have known the whole design. The envelope? It contains either money, a vulgarity you may have avoided, or documents that would have smoothed a transition. Drafts of press releases announcing changes, a memo to donors about a new operational direction, perhaps even an offer letter. One does not sabotage without a plan to profit." Dane's voice lost its velvet. "This is outrageous." "It is efficient," Wolfe said. "You, sir, have desired to pivot the Armitage from producing risk to renting certainty. Miss Hart resists. A public failure under her watch undermines her position and lifts yours. You would not scorch a strap yourself. You would not know which to scorch. You have Mr. Keach for that. He knows rooms and rails and men like Miss Howard. He also knows how to tidy, to swap a tip, to sanitize a log." I set the access printout Keach had handed me on the edge of Wolfe's desk. It had been warm when he gave it. Now it looked chilled. "This," I said, "is too neat. Timestamps arranged with the symmetry of a seating chart. It says Mr. Keach never went near the rail between 2:20 and curtain. Unfortunately for it, Casey's Knightley and Lou's eyes say otherwise, about others, if not about him. And Miss Rowe, your ASM, was present without signing in. Logs are best when they reflect life. This one reflects intent." Keach opened his mouth. Wolfe lifted a palm, and the mouth shut. The move wasn't mystical. It was simple geometry. Wolfe occupies space differently when he's done indulging. "Miss Hart," Wolfe said without looking away from Keach and Dane. "You will call Miss Howard. Invite her here. Tell her you wish to pay her for a consult tomorrow and would like to discuss terms now. Mr. Panzer is approaching her building as we speak. She will accept." Evelyn's phone was in her hand before he finished. She stepped to the hall, murmured 3 sentences, listened, and returned. "She's on her way." "Good," Wolfe said. "We will not prolong this indecent charade. Mr. Keach, you may leave if you like. You will be fetched back. Mr. Dane, you may leave if you like. You will be followed. or you may wait and spare us all the moisture." No one moved. People don't in that room, when the next thing promises to be the thing they'll tell themselves they saw coming. Sabrina, who had been watching like a cat with an opinion, spoke without looking at anyone in particular. "If you wanted a rental house, Milton, you could have bought a warehouse in Queens. You didn't need to drop a curtain on my head to make your point." Dane gave her a look designed to turn actresses into hush. It skittered off. Rowan laughed once, harsh and delighted, because other people's disgrace is an art form directors admire when they didn't stage it. Fritz entered with coffee as if it were a seal on a document. Wolfe declined with a flicker. He was not going to dilute the flavor. We didn't wait long. The bell rang, and I went to the door. Belle Howard stood on our stoop, the satchel from Saul's report slung across her, shoulders squared the way people square them when they're not sure what they'll be accused of but know it won't be timidity. I brought her in and sat her near the globe, which helps people remember they're on a planet where gravity works. Wolfe didn't waste preface. "Miss Howard," he said, "you are not on the Armitage payroll. Yesterday, you visited the theater for 5 minutes and touched nothing. Today, you conveyed an envelope from Mr. Keach to Mr. Dane. You were paid to deliver it. You were also paid, 2 days ago, to press a heated tool against a strap near a locking cam. That act could have killed a woman. It did not, through no fault of yours." Her throat moved. She looked at Keach, then at Dane, then at Evelyn, and finally at me, because sometimes the least important man in the room is the safest to look at. "I don't hurt actors," she said. "I don't hurt anyone." "You hurt a strap," I said gently. "Someone told you it was a test, or a maintenance check, or a favor that would keep the lights on. What did they call it?" Her hand on the satchel clenched. "Stabilization," she said, hating the word as it came out. "They said the board was considering a stabilization plan, and this would demonstrate the need for outside oversight." "I don't—" She stopped. "They told me no one would be downstage." Wolfe inclined his head. "Who?" Belle swallowed. "Mr. Keach called me, said there was a small job, that it would help the theater. I asked how. He said, sometimes you have to show the leak to get the money to fix the roof. He gave me a time. I did it fast. I left. Today he handed me an envelope and told me to take it to Mr. Dane. I didn't open it. I don't open things that aren't mine." Keach's denial came too quickly. "She's lying." "She's frightened," Wolfe said, which often resembles lying to those who prefer clean fictions, but she's also specific in a way liars avoid. He did not look at Dane when he said, "The envelope." Dane's voice was iron in silk. "Legal correspondence regarding a contingency plan. None of your—" "Mr. Goodwin," Wolfe said. I took out my phone and tapped once. Saul's text, which I had kept for spice, blinked obediently. Photo, Dane, envelope. Letterhead, Armitage Foundation. Subject, Interim Administrative Transition, Draft. I put the phone away without offering it around. The words were enough. They did what words do when they are carved and ready. They cut. Greer stared at Dane as if he'd been switched for a cheaper model. Rowan made a low sound that could have been applause in a cruel language. Casey's jaw shook once and stopped. Evelyn didn't move at all, which is how some people register earthquakes. Wolfe, satisfied the geometry had aligned, exhaled. "Miss Hart," he said, "you will call the police when I am done speaking. You will provide them with Miss Howard's statement and Mr. Keach's interference with potential evidence. You will also provide a copy of Mr. Panzer's observations. Mr. Dane will, of course, be delighted to surrender the envelope voluntarily, along with any drafts residing on his office devices. He will insist upon his motives, which will amuse them." Dane's mouth opened. Wolfe lifted a finger, a conductor closing a run. "Spare us," he said. "Mr. Keach imagined a demonstration that would appear to justify new governance. You commissioned or blessed it, trusting in his competence and Miss Howard's ignorance. You both now face the dreary consequences. You have my contempt for choosing a theatre, an organism of precision and trust, as your stage for a trick." He let the room have the quiet. It sat in it like penitent airs. Then, because he always remembers the full circle, he turned to Evelyn. "Madam, you will keep your theatre. You will also dismiss Mr. Keech for cause. I recommend you retain your stage manager and your flyman, and consider whether your board should include fewer weather vanes." He closed his eyes for the smallest second. Dinner was in his future, justice at his feet, and somewhere an orchid was considering opening a new white mouth. I had only one job left. Call the precinct, pour Sabrina a small brandy before she asked for a large one, and make sure Saul got his coat back before the night decided it wanted a curtain call of its own. The room didn't relax when I hung up with the precinct. It shifted, like a set change in blackout, furniture moving on muffled casters while the audience pretends not to hear. Casey had her hands clasped in front of her, squeezing the clipboard until the plastic creaked, the way you hold a railing on a rolling ferry. Big Lou watched Keech with the patience of a man who could wait a week to say, "I told you," and enjoy every second of the wait. Rowan had gone still in his corner, which for him qualified as shock. Sabrina reached for the brandy I'd set near her elbow, lifted it as if toasting a mirror, and took a small, civilizing sip. Greer was very carefully failing to be visible. Evelyn stood where she could see everyone and didn't blink more than she had to. Keech tried a smile that suggested we'd all misunderstood a highly technical favor. It landed like a note in the wrong key. Dane adjusted his cuff, the ancient ritual of men who consider themselves immune to weather. Belle stared at the floor, then up at the ceiling, as if either would give her the sentence with a lighter verb. Wolfe had returned to stillness so complete it changed the air. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "Fritz will provide Miss Howard with water." That wasn't charity. It was ballast. Fritz appeared, as he does, carrying competence on a tray. Belle drank, and some of the too brightness in her eyes eased. We didn't wait long. The bell again. This time it was the kind that announces reality. I went, let them in. Sergeant Stebbins with a face like a brick wall that had learned to listen, and a detective in a tie that had seen better precincts. I'd phoned through, and Wolfe's name greased what passes for wheels. Stebbins looked around, groaned under his breath when he saw the cast. He'd done these rooms, these people, these nights, and took a spot by the globe. "All right," he said. "Mr. Wolfe, if you're telling me this is tidy, I'm going to send you flowers. If you're telling me it's theatre, I'm going to send you the bill for my ulcer." "It is both," Wolfe said. "Mr. Goodwin will hand you a summary. Miss Hart and Miss Howard will give statements. Mr. Keech will surrender an item he removed from his theatre, and Mr. Dane will hand you a document he will soon discover he no longer wishes to own." I passed Stebbins the soldering tip wrapped in Saul's paper and the bullet list I'd made while everyone was performing for each other. Times, movements, who held what when. He read, grunted, tilting his head at the menthol note, and eyed Keech. "You swapped a tip during a safety meeting," he said, not bothering to add the adjectives he was thinking. Keech located dignity and tried it on. I verified a piece of equipment was not implicated. "Sure," Stebbins said, "and I eat donuts to investigate pastry. Hand it over." He held up a small evidence bag. Keech's jaw did a little dance, and then he dropped the wrapped metal in like it had burned him late. "As for you," Stebbins said to Dane, "I'm not going to take legal advice from a man whose pocket square costs more than my car, but you're going to give me that envelope. You can call your counsel after you've done the decent thing." Dane opened his mouth to select an adverb that would humiliate the room, met Stebbins's gaze, didn't like what he saw there, and extracted the manila from his briefcase. He didn't look at Evelyn while he did it, which was his first honest act of the night. The detective bagged it. Paper sighing in plastic sounds the same whether it's a sandwich or a plan. Statements took time because truth, in my experience, rarely wants to go out undressed. Belle spoke low at first, then steadier, the words spilling like someone finally paying back a debt that had gone interest only too long. Casey gave everything she had, which was everything. Lou was brief. Greer was delicate enough to make Avast nervous. Rowan's comment was unnecessary and perfect. "You vandalized my cue." Sabrina volunteered to let the officers look at her schedule because some women understand that generosity is a kind of armor. Evelyn's statement was 10 lines and ended with, "I authorized Mr. Goodwin to act." It didn't say I brought the curtain or I came without ringing, because that was my memory, not hers, and Wolfe would keep it that way. When Stebbins was done with the round, he stood, his notebook fat with a story that would now move through systems less elegant than ours. "Mr. Keach, Mr. Dane," he said, and the way he put their names next to each other made them sound like a firm that had failed an audit. "You're coming with us for further questions. You ain't under arrest, but if you try to sprint, you'll find out how fast my partner is on a good night." Keach looked at Evelyn as if she were supposed to produce a trap door labeled "Exit to Reputation." She didn't look back. Dane calculated which phone call would make the most difference and discovered he was already late to it. They filed out, Belle last, pausing to say to me, not to Wolfe, "I didn't think it would fall right then." "I know," I said. "That's how they picked you. People who don't want to hurt anybody make the best excuses for people who do." She took that like a sentence and went. The door swung to. The room exhaled. Wolfe lifted his hand a fraction. Fritz, who had been waiting with a timing a conductor envies, entered with coffee and a narrow plate of small, ruthless cookies. Greer stood. "I'll be at the foundation in the morning," she said, to no one and to Evelyn. "We will review governance." It was meant to be iron. It sounded like tin. "You'll review your resignation," Rowan said, too softly for bravery, just loud enough for sport. "Don't," Evelyn said, and it was the only time all night she put a palm out. Not for Greer. Toward Rowan. He closed his mouth, and if you want to understand real power, look for the person who can silence a director without humiliating a star. Sabrina set her cup down. "If you need a statement for the press that doesn't sound like apology," she told Evelyn, "I'll sign it. Actors are good at making sentences look brave." Evelyn nodded, acceptance without debt. She turned to Wolfe. "Thank you," she said. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was recognition. "And I'm sorry for walking in unannounced." "You returned the hat box to my desk," Wolfe said. "You are forgiven." It was almost a joke, which, from him, is a pearl you don't wear every day. Casey rose, took Lou's arm, a small touch, unceremonious, and aimed toward the door. "We're going back to the theater," she told Evelyn. "I want to reset the rail while I can still remember how relief feels." "Go," Evelyn said. "Lock it behind you. I'll be there soon." Rowan lingered. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "your staging was adequate. The climax lacked foam, but it had tone. Coming from him, it was a bouquet." Wolfe did not move so much as a petal. When they had gone, Greer cool, Rowan satisfied, Sabrina amused, Casey and Lou purposeful, Evelyn last, collecting what was left of the night. Silence slid into the room and sat down where Keach had been. I gathered cups, straightened papers, put the wrapped tip deeper into Stebbins's bag in my mind. Wolfe shifted an inch, which is a bow. "Theater is a profession for those who believe they can master consequence with timing," he said. "It encourages a vulgar confidence in cues. Mr. Keach believed he could signal an outcome without owning its cost. Mr. Dane believed he could applaud before the performance and make the performance conform. They are of a type I dislike. They suppose appetite and will are the alphabet of virtue." "Don't sell yourself short," I told him. "You handled cues pretty well tonight." "I arranged truths, not cues," he said, and settled. I went to the hall to see Evelyn out. She didn't offer her hand. She has learned what happens when you assume support is permanent. Will he fight? She asked, meaning Dane. Yes, I said. He'll hire 3 men to argue he was protecting the theater from recklessness. He'll leak politely that you were overwhelmed and needed strong hands. Then we'll announce open auditions for the board, she said, and there was bite in it. New hands. I've had my fill of old ones. If you need a quote from an insurer, I said, I can be very officious. I'll take one from a man, she said, glancing at the office, who kept his employer in his chair and the city in its place. She didn't smile. She left. The door clicked in that way it does when a night decides to be done. I went back to the office. Wolfe had tilted his head, listening to his own thought. You should tell Theodore, he said, that the Armitage's orchids, if any, are to be avoided. They will be theatrical. From him, that was black humor. I let it stand. Fritz announced dinner, and we obeyed. The roast had a skin that explained patience, and the lemon explained mercy. We ate mostly wordlessly, the way men do when the formality is the point. Halfway through, Wolfe offered a small slice of something that had been baking quietly in him since the curtain hit the floor. Sabotage, he said, is an assertion that one is owed a different world than the one that exists. It is often framed as correction, as stabilization. He used Bell's word and made it buckle. But it is vanity. It denies the dignity of consequence. I do not object to appetite. I object to contempt. Add that to your anthology, I said. You've got entries for politics, marriage, and eggs. Now theater gets its paragraph. It gets a footnote, he said. Theater is already quotation. We finished, and he permitted himself beer in the office. He never drinks where he thinks. He thinks where he wins. I called Saul to let him know the rap. He already knew. He had followed Dane to a lawyer's office, and then, as a treat, to a florist. White lilies, Saul reported. A man with a talent for symbolism and no ear for nuance. Send them back with a card, I said. We already have flowers. After beer number 1, Wolfe reached to the hat box. He did not open it. He rested a hand on the lid, a big hand that has signed checks, written names, and dismissed fools. Tell Miss Hart, he said, that this, he tapped once, should be returned to the stage after the run, at night, when the house is empty. Let them raise the new curtain and lower the old. Once, in silence, it will restore a measure of respect. You want a ceremony, I said. I want proportion, he said. They will call it closure. I call it housekeeping. I sat back and let the day unspool to its tail. Out in the city, other curtains went up and down on cue. Other boards made other plans. Other men swapped other tips and believed themselves unobserved. Here, the room had reset. The rug crease near Wolfe's right foot had softened. The orchids breathed their private weather. We had done what we do. Assembled an indelicate truth, announced it without shouting, and let the consequences walk out with their coats on. I felt the pleasant fatigue of a man whose night has earned him the right to be idle and not feel wasteful. Wolfe finished his beer, wiped a drop from the rim with the disdain of a man correcting a comma, and set the bottle down. Archie, he said. Sir. Tomorrow, he said. Remind me to tell Mr. Cohen that the theater is safe for the public and perilous only for the vain. I'll write it on the cue sheet, I said, and turned out a lamp. Morning at the Brown Stone is a slow climb out of silence. Fritz works like an orchestra warming up. Small notes from the kitchen, steam, the faint rhythm of a knife. Wolfe was still upstairs in his orchid rooms when I came down, but Theodore's voice had carried once through the ceiling, which meant the plants were getting their morning sermon. I had the office to myself and the phone to the Gazette. Lon Cohen likes an early call if the story is worth waking up to. I gave him the edges. Incident at the Armitage. Board intrigue. Sabotage uncovered. Without handing over the center. Wolfe would approve of the dance. Lon would approve of being first. He asked if I'd got pictures, and I told him only in the mind's eye, which earned me the chuckle of a man used to being told no by the interesting people. Wolfe came down at 9:30 on the dot, smelling faintly of moss and authority. He took his chair, adjusted the stand for the book he wasn't yet going to read, and said, "Mr. Cohen." "Informed," I said. "He'll write it clean. No names until the police are done, but the shape will be there. Enough to keep Dane from controlling the narrative." "Good." Wolfe poured beer into a glass, as if the act itself conferred judgment. "Miss Hart will need the protection of being seen as the custodian of the theatre, not the cause of its peril. Mr. Cohen can provide that." I told him I'd half expected Evelyn to call by now, and he said she would when the morning's debris settled. "She will have been advised by some to speak to no one," he added, "and by others to speak to everyone. She will wait until she can speak with intent." At 10:10, the phone rang. I picked it up, and there she was. Calm, but with that undertow you get after a night of rehearsing every word before you say it. "Archie, I wanted to thank you and Mr. Wolfe before the day gets away from me. You've got a day of lawyers, board members, and actors with opinions," I said. "Better to get the thanks out early." She gave a small laugh that sounded like she'd surprised herself. "The police called an hour ago. Dane and Keach are both holding to their stories, but Bell's statement and your Mr. Panzer's observation have made it harder for them to wriggle. The board's meeting again this afternoon, without them." "Which means without 2 votes against you," I said. "Yes," she said. "But I don't think they'll try to replace me now. If anything, they're circling to protect the theatre's name. Even Greer called and asked if I'd like her to mediate press inquiries. I said no, but politely. "You're learning," I said. "I'm learning from good teachers," she replied, and I passed the receiver to Wolfe without asking if he wanted it. He listened, said twice, and "You will restore the rail immediately, but do not replace the curtain until the press has forgotten there was one," and hung up without goodbye. "She will manage," he said to me, as if I'd asked. By noon, the Gazette had posted its piece, "Insurer Uncovers Sabotage at Midtown Theatre." It was stripped of color, names withheld, but the keystrokes were there, the method, the stakes, the quiet intervention. The comments section was already making up the missing details. I printed a copy and left it on Wolfe's desk. He didn't read it yet, but I saw his gaze land on the headline like a man approving a label on a bottle. "The police called mid-afternoon." Stebbins' voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd watched the first crack appear. "Keach has decided he was just following instructions. Instructions from Dane. Says Dane told him a demonstration of operational vulnerability would strengthen their case for changes. We'll see if Dane cracks or rides it out." "Wolfe will want that exact phrase," I said, and wrote it down. "Tell him I'm sending him the pleasure," Stebbins said, and clicked off. I passed it to Wolfe. He smiled, not with his mouth, but with the slow, satisfied lift of his brows. "Demonstration of operational vulnerability." He rolled it in the air. Bureaucratic enough to sound bloodless, yet precise enough to be damning. "Think it'll hold?" I asked. "If Mr. Dane's counsel has wit, he will arrange a resignation before arraignment. If not, he will attempt to redefine sabotage as oversight." "Around 4, Saul called. "Bell's been left alone," he said. "Union's talking about a statement to clear her, paint her as misled. I think she'll come out of this with bruises but breathing." "Good," I said. "She's not built for the villain role." "Most people aren't," Saul said. "But they'll play it if someone hands them the script and a little cash." The rest of the afternoon was quiet, except for the faint hum of Wolfe digesting both lunch and satisfaction. At 6, Evelyn called again, her voice steadier. The board voted to censure Dane and remove Keach from all positions. Greer's staying for now, but she's lost her committee chair. Rowan insists the incident will make the play richer. Sabrina's promising to show up for every rehearsal for the rest of the run. That last one's your real victory, I said. Archie, there's one more thing, she said. When this show closes, I'm going to do what Mr. Wolfe suggested. We'll lower the old curtain, once, in silence. I want you both there. I glanced at Wolfe. He'd heard. He always hears. He gave the smallest of nods. We'll be there, I told her. After dinner, which Fritz had built around duck and the kind of sauce that makes you think kind thoughts about the planet, Wolfe leaned back in his chair and finally opened the Gazette. He read it once, slowly, and then folded it with exact precision. It will do, he said. That's practically a rave, I told him. It is sufficient, he corrected. The matter is concluded. We have restored proportion. I knew better than to argue with the period he'd put on it. Outside, the city was doing its evening changeover, day's ambitions turning into night's disguises. Somewhere, the Armitage's lights would be coming up for another performance, the new curtain waiting in its flies, the rail solid under Lou's hands. And somewhere, two men who had tried to cue their own ending were discovering that in Wolfe's theatre, the script is always his. He reached for his beer, and I thought of Evelyn's voice when she'd said she wanted us there for the lowering. The case had started with a trespass, someone walking into the brownstone without ringing. It was ending with an invitation. That's what Wolfe calls proportion. I call it a cue worth taking. The next 2 days moved with the steady gait of a stagehand between cues. Work being done, but not much to watch unless you knew where to look. Wolfe had declared the case finished, which meant he would no longer seek developments, but would permit them to arrive like dignitaries, announced, escorted, and seated. I kept my ear on the theatre end because theatres never stop moving, even after you sweep up the broken glass. On the third morning, Lon Cohen's follow-up ran in the Gazette. This time, names had made it past the legal filter. Keach removed from his position, Dane resigning to pursue other interests. Bell Howard got a paragraph as a contracted technician who was misled. Evelyn was quoted once, sparingly. Our duty is to keep the curtain from falling before it should. That line had Wolfe's fingerprints all over it, even if she'd minted it herself. I was reading it over coffee when the phone rang. It was Evelyn, earlier than I'd expected her to be up after a press week. Archie, she said, I thought you'd want to know. We opened last night without incident. Full house, standing ovation. Rowan cried. Sabrina didn't, but I think she meant to. That's the rarest kind of review, I said. There's something else. After curtain call, Lou and Casey stayed to lock up. Lou swears he saw someone lingering near the stage door. Said it was a man in a grey overcoat watching the crew leave. But when Lou went to ask him something, he walked off. Fast. You think it was Dane? I don't know. Lou didn't get a clear look, and he's not one to chase shadows, but he said it didn't feel like a fan. I told her I'd pass it to Wolfe. When I relayed it, Wolfe didn't shift in his chair, but his eyes did that narrowing. That means he's letting a fact stand in the room to see if it attracts company. A man dispossessed of influence, he said, often attempts to witness the consequences. It may have been curiosity, or the first step of an attempt to revise the ending. You think Dane's the type to try again? I think he is the type to dislike being denied the last word, Wolfe said. His heart would do well to maintain vigilance. That afternoon I dropped by the Armitage under the pretext of returning an insurance file Wolfe had asked for. Evelyn took it in the lobby, smiling at the fiction, and let me follow her backstage. The place had a hum I hadn't heard since before the fall. Tools clinking, set pieces rolling, people moving with purpose instead of suspicion. Casey was at the rail, Lou beside her, and when I glanced at Line 7's cam, the webbing gleamed like it had been polished. Your man in the grey coat didn't come back, Casey said when I asked. If he does, Lou says he'll get his name, and probably his jacket size. Sabrina drifted by in rehearsal clothes, caught me looking at the rail and said, "Don't worry, darling. I've stopped standing where things can fall on me." She swept off before I could answer, leaving the scent of expensive soap and a line delivery you could frame. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened to my report, then closed the matter with a sentence. "If Dane returns, it will be either to gloat or to meddle. Both are better met by Miss Hart than by us. She has learned." The following evening, just after dinner, the phone rang again. Stebbins this time. "Thought you'd want to know, Wolfe." Dane lawyered up, but Keach just cut a deal, pleading to tampering, testifying that the whole idea came from Dane. Says the phrase was his operational vulnerability, but the push came from upstairs. "Upstairs is relative," Wolfe said. "Yeah, well, the DA thinks it's high enough to make it worth a little noise. They'll probably make it public in a week or two." When he hung up, Wolfe looked almost pleased. "Mr. Keach has chosen preservation over loyalty, as expected, which means Dane's pretty much finished," I said. "He is finished in that theater," Wolfe said. "Whether he learns from it is none of my concern." The days after that were uneventful in the Wolfe sense, which is to say the world kept happening but nothing demanded his chair as a witness. I kept loose contact with Evelyn. The show's run was steady, ticket sales up from the press attention. She'd already started lining up the next season. A week later, the invitation arrived, a thick card in an envelope with the Armitage crest. Inside, in Evelyn's precise hand, the lowering of the old curtain. "One night only. After final performance. Your presence requested." Wolfe read it, set it on the desk, and nodded once. When the night came, the theater was empty except for the crew, a few cast members, and us. The house lights were dimmed, the stage bare. Lou stood at the rail, Casey below. Evelyn gave a short nod, and Lou released the brake. The old curtain descended slowly, the crimson catching the work lights, the scorch mark visible even from halfway back. It touched the stage without a sound. For a moment, no one moved. Wolfe sat very still, his eyes fixed on it, and I realized he was giving it the respect he'd said it deserved, a proportionate ending. Then Lou raised it again, hand steady on the cam, and it was gone into the flies. We left without speeches. Outside, the night air was cool, and the marquee glowed for the next run, letters half changed. Evelyn shook Wolfe's hand, then mine. "Thank you," she said simply, and went back inside. On the ride back, Wolfe said nothing until we turned on to 35th. "A curtain should fall only when the performance is complete," he said, "on stage or elsewhere." I didn't answer. The city around us was lit like a set, and somewhere in its wings, another story was already being cued. The city has a way of filing stories under concluded, even while the ink is still damp. A week after the lowering, the Armitage had moved on to selling out matinees and arguing over intermission snacks. Wolfe had moved on too, which means he allowed the case to live in his memory as a labeled jar, shelved and reachable, not to be opened unless someone requested the scent. I let it sit the same way, until the world decided to send us one last footnote. It arrived as a letter on thick paper, hand-delivered by a courier who looked like a man who trusted doormen more than mailboxes. The return address was a law firm with more names than syllables. The signature at the bottom belonged to Milton Dane. He had requested, with circumlocutions that would make a diplomat blush, a private conversation with Mr. Wolfe to air concerns regarding reputational harm and to propose an understanding. If he'd added a sprig of rosemary and called it a garnish, the plate would have been complete. Wolfe read it twice and set it down as if it were an impertinent coaster. "He wants to revise the program after the performance," he said. "No." I called Cohen, not for print, but for weather. Lon's weather is better than the Bureau's. "He's been trying to get sympathetic ears," Lon said. "Donor roundtables, private clubs, a podcast where men with silver hair talk about stewardship. No one wants to touch it. He thought you might listen because you enjoy telling people no. I told Lon I'd let Wolfe know he could save his breath for beer. The DA's office made its announcement 2 days later. Tampering charges for Keach, a count of conspiracy for Dane. Keach's plea and cooperation would recommend leniency. Dane would face his day with counsel and a lower altitude. Wolfe read the summary, not the commentary, and approved of the nouns. Clarity, he said, and I knew the jar could be pushed farther back on the shelf. If that had been the end of it, we would have let the lid seal. But this didn't begin with a court, and it didn't end with one. It began with someone failing to ring a bell and a piece of cloth that fell too soon. The rest was consequence. I stopped by the Armitage on a Tuesday afternoon when the city was busy being somewhere else. The lobby smelled of clean paint and citrus, the theater's version of absolution. Evelyn was in the office with papers stacked in neat towers like models of future buildings. She let me in with a level look that said we were past niceties, which is a form of friendship in this town. We're reworking the board, she said, before I could ask. Term limits, conflict disclosures, project-specific recusals. Greer is stepping back to advisory. She may come back when she remembers she likes art more than words for it. We're adding 2 members from the crew side. 1 carpenter, 1 electrician. They'll have votes. That'll give some donors hives, I said. Let them itch, she answered. They can also buy tickets. We do that here. She was thinner around the eyes, stronger in the jaw. Power does that to some people. It takes from the top and adds to the hinge. How's Belle? I asked. Union found her a job at the Orpheum on 92nd, she said. They sent a rep to sit with her when the press called. She said no to interviews. Then she said yes to overtime. Evelyn's mouth did a small, austere smile. Lou checks in. Casey, too. Rowan, I said, because you could set your watch by how quickly a director turns catastrophe into motif. He's added a line to Act 2 that isn't in the script, she said. It's a look, really. He can't help himself. But he's held rehearsals on time for a week, and Sabrina calls her own cues now, quietly. Noah has stopped sending emails at 2 in the morning with new endings. He sends them at 11. We walked the aisle together. Empty house, quiet stage, a few dust motes practicing solos. At the lip, she stopped. I took your employer's advice, she said. We're keeping the sample. She meant the scorched triangle of webbing. It sat in a shadow box by the call board, beneath a card that read simply, "Not an accident." You could call that heavy-handed. In a theater, it's ballast. Good, I said. Nothing reminds a room to behave like an honest scar. On my way out, I saw Sabrina through the crack of a rehearsal door, hair up, eyes on a page, repeating a phrase with microscopic changes until it landed with the precision of a key sliding home. She looked up, caught me, gave a little salute with the script as if we were both clocked into the same shared fiction, then dropped her gaze and kept working. That, in the city of shortcuts, is rarer than applause. I told Wolfe all that while Fritz piped potatoes the way some men pipe an organ. He listened, made a note to tell Theodore that carpenters might soon vote on orchids, and asked if Evelyn had rung before entering. She knocked twice, I said. That earned a non-committal grunt that translated roughly to civilized. The last ripple came lazy and late. On a Friday night, after the city had drunk itself polite, a letter arrived from Keach. It was not apology. Men of that stock find apologies more intimate than affairs. It was confession adjacent. He wrote about stewardship again, and the weight of decision-making, and lessons learned regarding process. He did not mention the word sabotage. He did not need to. He had picked it up and put it down in front of the DA. At the bottom, there was a postscript. Tell Miss Hart that the theater will outlast all of us. That's its revenge. I read it to Wolfe because watching him dislike vocabulary is one of my cheaper pleasures. He drummed a finger once and said, "He learned a word, he did not learn its meaning." I asked if we would respond. "No," he said. "Miss Hart will if she wishes. I have no use for correspondence that attempts to equalize guilt and governance." Sunday lunch brought rowboats of mushrooms and a quiet that suggested the world, for the hour, had agreed to leave its engines idling outside. Wolfe, after the kind of preface that for him is a sip of beer, said, "A theatre is a contrivance for making consequence and timing appear congruent. Life is less obliging. Mr. Dane and Mr. Keach attempted to impose theatre on life. They deserve, therefore, to be reminded that in life the curtain does not wait for applause." "Your anthology grows," I said. "Politics, marriage, eggs, theatre, and now vengeance." "Not vengeance," he said. "Consequence. Vengeance presumes a right to relish. I abstain. You abstain from a lot," I told him. "It's part of your charm." He gave me a look that would have withered a lesser man's boutonniere. Charm is for men who need to move. I do not. A week later, as if to prove he could move the world without getting up, we received a thank-you basket from the Armitage. 2 tickets for opening night of a new production next season, a bottle of something that believed it was wine, and a polite card asking Mr. Wolfe if he might consider serving on an advisory panel for matters of operational integrity. I watched his eyebrows go so still they might have been carved. "Decline," he said, and advised them to find a stagehand with a spine. I wrote the note with ink instead of email. The reply would sit better in a drawer than a server. Evelyn wrote back a line. "Understood. We'll build with what holds." She meant more than lumber. When the last legal notice ran, Keach sentenced to a combination of community service and fines. Dane managing to plead down far enough to keep the good suit. Lon called to see if Wolfe wanted a quote. He didn't. I did, and gave one that said nothing and helped Evelyn. That's a trick I've learned from the man in the chair. Sometimes the most useful speech is an arranged silence. On a humid evening when Manhattan felt like it had been varnished, I found myself walking past the Armitage. The new marquee was up for the next play. A couple took selfies under it, the woman balancing on her toes like she'd been born for applause. A young crewman on a smoke break saw the scar in the shadow box through the half-open door, tilted his head to read the card, and nodded once to himself before stubbing out his cigarette. The house would fill, the rail would hold, the cam would bite and release on cue. That's the covenant. Back at the brownstone, I told Wolfe I'd taken a detour to check the weather in a building. He said, "And?" like a man who already knows the sky and wants the temperature. "Claire," I said. "For now." He accepted the now and the for later with equal disdain and reached for the book he'd been trying to ignore all week while the world finished its encore. "There's not much in this for souvenirs. We don't keep trophies, and if we did, nobody wants a burnt strip of webbing next to their beer. But some cases leave you with a better habit. Evelyn will run her board like a stage. Greer will count to 10 before using the word wellness in public. Rowan will pretend his added look is a note from the muse. Sabrina will step 2 paces back from the downstage edge and call it instinct. Lou will check the cam with fingers that now hold history. Casey will put an extra line on the nightly that says, "Checked what I can't afford to forget." Belle will show up early and leave late, and when someone hands her a tool, she'll ask who signed the work order. Keach will develop a taste for quiet and hope it's mistaken for reflection. Dane will learn whether exile trains the ear. And Wolfe? He will return to orchids and eggs and the essential project of rationing his patience. He will, if asked, say that the theatre was not saved by art or money, or even grit, but by proportion, by people remembering what a room is for and what it is not. He'll be right, because that's a habit he also keeps. I'll remember a woman in a green coat who didn't ring, standing with a hat box and the smell of smoke, and how a man who cannot be rushed let her put the world on his desk and rearranged it without standing. There are worse things to keep than that. As for me, I filed my notes, called Cohen to tell him the weather continued fair with a chance of improvement, and set the office to rights. Later, after dinner, I asked Wolfe if he wanted to attend that opening night next season. He looked at me as if I'd offered him a seat in the orchestra pit. "No," he said, "but you may go and report whether they have taught the curtain to wait." He lifted his glass. "To Miss Hart's stewardship." I raised mine. "To the timing that learned consequence," I said, and he permitted himself the smallest, most heretical thing he owns. The hint of a smile. The brownstone felt smaller that evening, the way it does after a case has been cleared from the board, but not yet from the air. Wolfe was in his chair, hands resting on the arc of his stomach, not touching the book on the stand. He didn't have to. He was doing what he preferred most, arranging the last facts into their proper order. I'd seen him do it 100 times, but it's still something to watch. "The theatre," he said at last, "is now as it should be. Miss Hart will govern it with fewer hindrances, the crew will work without glancing upward for sabotage, and the public will take its applause where intended." I leaned back, watching the curl of smoke from my coffee drift toward the ceiling. "You make it sound as if you fixed the plumbing, not stopped 2 men from gutting her career." "The principle is the same," he said. "Identify the obstruction, remove it, and restore function. The elegance lies in doing so without dismantling the entire system." "And without leaving the chair," I added. "Don't think I didn't notice you let me climb every catwalk and poke every suspect while you sat here weighing adjectives." "That," Wolfe said, "is the arrangement you accepted when you chose to work here. Besides, you move more easily through the machinery. I'm better suited to interpreting the schematics." The schematics, in this case, had been simple enough once all the pieces were visible. Dane with the ambition, Keach with the access, Bell with the unwitting skill, and a scorched length of webbing that told the whole story to anyone willing to smell the menthol. The rest had been patience, positioning, and letting each of them talk themselves into the shape of their guilt. "You realize," I said, "Evelyn's going to make you a hero in her circles. There'll be invitations to galas, season openings, maybe even board dinners." "I will decline," Wolfe said, the 2 words as immovable as his chair. A public performance of gratitude is no more appealing than the incident that required it. We let the quiet sit a while. Outside, the city muttered to itself in traffic and footsteps. Inside, Fritz moved in the kitchen, a comforting undercurrent. The case was finished. Not just in the police ledger or in Evelyn Hart's favor, but in the way Wolfe defines finished. Every thread pulled, every knot visible, nothing left to fray. "Archie," he said suddenly. "Yeah?" "When Miss Hart lowers that old curtain for the last time, attend. You're not coming." "No," he said, "but you will stand there and remember that proportion, once restored, must be observed. The curtain falls only when the performance is complete." I nodded, because in his way, Wolfe had just delivered his final verdict. Not on Dane or Keach, but on the whole tangle of egos, ambition, and the fragile machinery of a stage. And maybe, just maybe, on life outside the theatre. Fritz appeared with the tray, beer for Wolfe, coffee for me. Wolfe lifted his glass in a gesture so slight it might have been mistaken for stretching. "To stewardship," he said. I lifted mine. "To knowing when to call the cue." We drank, and the brownstone settled back into its natural rhythm, the only curtain falling being the dark that closed over 35th Street, Dover 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 35th Street,